Usually, yeah, there's someone here doing intros and then the person speaking comes in, but Adam's away and Whitney's busy. And so, yeah, I'll introduce myself. um, I'll also preface this by saying it's a deeply emotional thing. So if my voice is a bit shaky or there's a tear floating in my eye, you'll understand why. I'll greet you in some of the languages from my country. We have 11 official languages. And so I'll say Dumelang, Moweni, Sawubona, Sambonani, and good afternoon. My name is Wilton Sherika, and some of you know me, but I wanted to say this anyway. I'm an archivist, a wannabe activist, a wannabe cook, and a PhD candidate, hopefully in the final months of my dissertation. We'll see. Sound and history are my dreamscapes. It's where I think and work and imagine. It is where I think and dwell and write from as well. I intended for this commemoration event to be much more of a listening and sharing session, and so I want to leave space at the end, of course, if there are questions, but also if folks just want to share something. I wrote and rewrote this presentation probably like 10 different times in the last few weeks. I should also just say thank you to the folks in events and communications for putting this together so quickly, because I sprung it on them last minute and they were like, just, yeah, Kim and the team were incredible. Yeah, but anyway, I wrote and rewrote this presentation literally like 10, 15 times. And I could not settle on a version that feels absolutely correct. And so I'm just going to share the thoughts around memory and archive and commemoration and also celebration. It's not just about mourning, but it's also about celebrating and giving thanks to our elders who, yeah, these elders of ours gave their lives for us. They mean everything to me, and they mean so much to all of us as South Africans. All of my work is work to honor their legacy. Of course, my parents, because they lived through apartheid, but also extended beyond. And I'll talk about some of the folks who literally and figuratively gave their lives for the work of liberation in South Africa. I'm going to ask right at the outset that we maybe just take a moment to be quiet, reflect. I'm going to play a song. It'll be 4-ish minutes. Yesterday, one of the most important musicians in South Africa's history, Abdullah Ibrahim, a person who opposed apartheid throughout his life, was exiled actually close to the time of the Soweto riots. He passed away yesterday. And so, I just want to take a moment and listen to one of his songs. The year before this, before the event that we are commemorating today, in 1975, he wrote a song called Soweto is Where It's At. It's a 17-minute composition, but the first 4 minutes is just called Soweto, and so I'll just play that 4-minute clip. And yeah. My bad. I did not. Sorry, I did not intend to pause it right there. I was just trying to check the time, but okay. Yeah, you can return to the song. It's that version is called Soweto, and it was recorded in '75, the year before the Soweto uprising that we're talking about today. Yeah, I wanted to bring you all together here today, and honestly, even if it was just me alone in this room, um, that would have been fine too, in order to celebrate and commemorate and express gratitude to the people who fought for my liberation, who lost their lives, lost loved ones in the work of struggle for the people of my country. Today, the 16th of June, 2026, is exactly 50 years since the Soweto uprising in 1976. I know there's one or two folks in the room who were around or, yeah. It was a moment where my country was in incredibly difficult and dire straits. In this instance, it was a collective of 14, 15, 16-year-olds who came together and said, we are going to launch a fight from our schools. Because of the apartheid laws, segregation was the practice in the country at the time, and Soweto was designated a black area. It was an underserved, under-resourced, absolutely discriminated against area outside of Johannesburg. And one of the areas where people were constantly undermined and experienced oppression was in the school, in the classroom. In the 70s, there was a forced proposal by the apartheid government that black students will now begin to learn in Afrikaans, which was at that point designated the language of white Dutch settlers. It's a language that is derived in part from Dutch, but also Malagasy, Malay. There's words borrowed from the indigenous languages, isiXhosa, Zulu. It is, in actual fact, a Creole language that enslaved and people of color used to be able to communicate with each other. But because of the conditions and because of the Dutch dominance in the language, white Afrikaners, as they were called, took the language as theirs, decided that this is their language, and attempted to force black students to learn in that language. So that was the context within which this action took place. These high school students and primary school students, actually, one of the most famous pictures that folks know is of a primary school student. These young people came together and decided, we are not going to stand for this. We are not going to allow this institution of apartheid to decide what language we learn in, and to extend the practice of apartheid into our classroom even further. Again, I'll say I didn't want this to be a talk or a lecture, but I also do want it to be a clarion call for all of us to come together in making and maintaining an Undercommons, a space of learning and sharing that is decided by us and for ourselves. I also want to address all of you and ask what memory means to you, what commemoration means, what the act of celebrating elders who have passed, who are with us, what that means to you. And hopefully we'll leave some space at the end where we can talk about that. Anybody who knows me knows my dissertation work is on sound and music. And so that's where am constantly grounded. And so I played the Abdullah Ibrahim for you. But I also want to share a song written precisely after this act of violence by the apartheid state. And I'll give some more explanation of what actually happened on the day, how the police acted, how these students endured and suffered. Okay. What I'll do now is I'll play the song called Soweto Blues by Miriam Makeba. It's written by Hugh Masekela, who is another jazz legend of South Africa. I think most folks will know Miriam Makeba as well. There's a biopic coming out sometime soon, I think. I have my own particularities about these things. But yeah, this is a song, Soweto Blues, sung by Miriam Makeba, written by Hugh Masekela for her. June 16, 1976, when the children of South Africa decided to say no to apartheid. The song was written for us by Hugh Masekela. He calls it Soweto Blues. The children got every never stop. It's a number of suiting those who do. Refusing to compromise and that's when the police came to the rescue. Children were crying, let's die. The house screaming, praying. The past were in the city. The evening news got up on the mountain city. Atrocity. Deep in the city. So much of you. So much of you. So much of you. So much of you. Deep in the city, so much of you, so much of you, so much of you. was there. And again, it's worth looking up the song. It's worth looking up the lyrics. It is a lament, a commemoration of its own kind, I think, as well. Another thing I'll say about this is Miriam Makeba and Yuma Sikela, and actually Abdullah Ibrahim, whose song we heard earlier. Oh, my bad. Yeah, Miriam Makeba, Abdullah Ibrahim, and Yuma Sikela, all of those musicians were in exile at this point. So they were either traveling or stationed. I know Miriam Makeba was in Guinea-Bissau, and I'll speak about one of the students who was the lead organizer in the Soweto riots. She actually offered for him to come and stay with her in Guinea-Bissau, and so when he went into exile, he ended up with her. The song is incredibly special to us. I think it is both a lament and a celebration. It's a way of saying thanks. I am obsessed with sound and music, and sound beyond music. It lands in various places, I think, beyond just the ear. And in thinking about memory and commemoration and archive, we live with the idea of memory and archive as, more often than not, as the image, as written script, perhaps as an object, a statue, and so on. And we know of oral history and sound and music, but it's not often at the front. And so my own propagandizing is to get sound and music forward. I want to encourage all of you to listen to this. It's beautiful, but also it's deeply impactful, I think. As is my way these days, as I struggle with my own memory, with my own neurological condition while trying to write a dissertation and work a 9 to 5, I am, of course, always thinking about memory and archives. I live in the archives, basically, either in School South or maybe 1 or 2 hours a day on 25, but most of my time is down with the boxes. It's one of my favorite places in the world to be, not just now, but throughout my studies since 2008. Unfortunately for my parents, they can testify to how obsessed I am with archive and memory. I would sit multiple times a week looking at the same photos I have looked at 1,000 times already. I will sit in the passage of our house, unpack the shoebox with all of the photos and the 6 or 7 photo albums we have, and look at the same photos that we had 1,000 times. Also, unfortunately for them, from the time that I could speak and remember, I asked them to tell me the same stories they told me 1,000 times already, including about 2-3 weeks ago, I asked them to tell me the same story that they told me about their experience in the aftermath of the Soweto uprising. So my family is from the Western Cape. Johannesburg, Soweto is in Johannesburg, which is towards the north of the country. I can't remember how many kilometers that is, but it's a 2-hour flight north from Cape Town. This action was happening there. There was not a lot of opportunity for communicating by radio. There's no publicity in the papers. So organizing across the country is incredibly difficult to do. And so when I asked my parents to tell me again the story that they told me 1,000 times before about their experience in the aftermath, I'll just share really short snippets about what they told me. So my mother was what we call standard 7, so grade 9, 15 years old, basically. My dad was 14 years old, my dad was 16. They were both at school. Our people are designated colored, and so we have under apartheid, we had slightly different resourcing than Black communities living in townships. it was a way for the apartheid government to foster tension between racial groups. So incrementally, coloreds, as they were called, or some people are still comfortable with that, would receive incrementally more resources, and then Indian, people designated Indian, again, slightly more, and then of course the white population would be receiving the most. But for people of color, that slight differentiation in the resourcing was in order to create tension, infighting, difficulty organizing. And so my mother came from a home where politics wasn't discussed day in and day out. Both my parents lost their fathers when they were really young. And their mothers were, their entire focus was to safely raise these children. And so they weren't going to, put politics forward. That was about the time when my mother would start learning by herself or with other students. So about 2-3 days after the Soweto uprising happened in Johannesburg, students in Cape Town heard about it, and in their own disjointed way, they started trying to organize and create their own kind of movement to support the Black students. One part of the story that my mother told me that I want to convey is that she would walk 40 minutes to school, and so she would pack her school uniform in a bag, because if they see what school you are at, they'll follow you. The police, they being the South African apartheid police, would either follow you or they'll know where to look for you if there are things happening. If you are gathered more than 2 people together, it was designated as a political meeting, and so you could have the shit beat out of you or arrested or whatever the case may be. If you were 2 friends walking down the street. And so, yeah, that was part of the story my mom told me. There were about 4 or 5 students, friends, walking together to the school, and the police saw them and fired tear gas, and they all kind of just scattered in their own directions. And then in the aftermath of that, they tried to organize a sit-in at their school, but the teachers were not happy and went to go and report them to their parents. My father, on the other hand, was already slightly active at that point. He was a couple years older than my mom. And the story he told me was that they were also trying to organize a sit-in and then a walkout at the school. But because it was so disjointed, because they didn't have long-term organizing efforts going on, it was more difficult to do that. And so in a similar way, they gathered, and they were scattered again by tear gas and rubber bullets. And one of the things that happens in the aftermath of that is my father ends up in the, kind of working class block of flats. And he got violently beaten that day. Luckily, there were some friends of his who we knew lived in the area, and so he could find them. But these stories made me think again about how memory, how archives, how gratitude maybe works for us. I see Libby here, and I think always about, when I think about these questions, I always think about how, for instance, the skin functions as an archive and a place of memory and storytelling, a place to give thanks to a person or an event, a place to mark a time. I have my own marks. But then, again, as I asked earlier, I would love for you all also to think about memory and archive and what this means to you. and perhaps we can share or talk about it at the end. Okay, the next image I'm going to show is a difficult one. It is the image we all, in South Africa at least, if you search Soweto riot, this is the image that will come up. It is of a 12-year-old who has been shot in the back by the apartheid police. His sister, Antoinette Sithole, is next to him. He is being carried by another schoolmate, Mbuyisa Makubo. Again, it is a difficult image, and so, if you don't want to look, that's totally okay. But Hector Peterson is the student's name who was shot. He was 12 years old. He was shot in the back by the apartheid police when he was running away from the police after the riot had begun. And so, yeah, in thinking about archive and memory, it would be remiss of me not to also think with this image that is the one that holds so much of the marker of the event. So the child being carried is Hector Peterson. His sister Antoinette Sithole is next to them, and Makubu is carrying him. You can see some of the rioters behind them, or rioters in the language of the apartheid state, and the photo is by a journalist, a photographer, Sam Nzima. It's an incredibly harrowing image. It's one that reoccurs year after year for us in the posters, in the artwork, in the commemoration, remembrance events. And so I just wanted to share this. He was a 12-year-old, and thinking about that in the context of what's going on today, in the context of a continued genocidal effort, in the context of a country that we are in supporting that genocidal effort, but also in the context of South Africa, where 10 years ago was the Fees Must Fall movement. I was involved in that, and we were protesting for free and equitable education at higher ed institutions. So the struggle continues. A luta continua, as Maria Makeba sings for us. Okay. I'm going to share a couple of, I've already asked you all of these questions, but you can look at them again if you want to. I can come back to them at the end. But I also wanted to talk about some of the stuff that we have here in our archival collections. And I think this is an important factor for those of us who are, especially those of us who are student-facing, who are interacting with students regularly. These are things that exist in our archives here. And there's so much more. Jeremy sent me an audio clip the other day. There is an audio clip of one of the primary organizers of the Soweto uprising here at UMass. He was forced into exile in June 1976. He went to live with Maria Makeba in Guinea-Bissau. He ended up here on a speaking tour in that same year. In December of 1976, he was here at UMass Amherst. This is important. This is important for us to know. This is important for us to share, especially now as students are working to organize, to create better conditions for our education spaces. And what does that work look like for us as staff, as faculty, as librarians, all of these things. These posters and images, this is on the UMass campus, by the way. The old chapel is somewhere in the background. This is an action commemorating 10 years since the Soweto uprising. And it asked the question in 1986 already about the connection between apartheid South Africa and Israel. The last thing I want to talk about is that student who went into exile. His name was Tsietsi Mashinini, Tebogo Tsietsi Mashinini. And he was one of the primary organizers of the Soweto uprising in '76. He is the student, one of the students who ended up in exile. I think he was 17 at the time. He was an important figure in the Black consciousness movement, which was started by Steve Biko. And while in exile, he was killed under mysterious circumstances. We likely know what the story is there. But I share his image and I share his name as a placeholder for all of these elders who gave their lives in literal ways sometimes for all of us. As a South African, as a young person, or formerly young person, I'm 37 now, I don't know where that lands me. As a person coming up in South Africa, his story and the stories of others like him are the ones that remain incredibly vital to all of us. And so I just wanted to share a quote by him, and I think it resonates today as much as it did in 1976. He said, "Students today want to be recognized as human beings because we know if we don't do what we think is right for us now, our children will suffer the same way we are suffering. It is not that we are struggling under the same conditions right now in South Africa, elsewhere, but there are fights that have to continue and there are struggles that have to be fought. And I want us to ask what our role in that work might be." Yeah. And so I'll leave this up. And for the people who are live streaming or watching this after the fact, I want to make them jealous. I made a South African treat that I grew up with. It's over there on the table. It's called Kusistas. It's like a little fried donut seasoned with aniseed, cardamom, cinnamon, and ginger. It's incredibly fucking delicious. And when we're done here, grab a couple as you leave if you want. But yeah, I'll end there. I'll open the space for your reflections, but also if you have any questions. And just, again, thank you for being here with me to thank and celebrate and commemorate my elders. Yeah, thank you all again for being here. It's open to all of you, Lily.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I think one thing that I've been thinking about as you've been talking about this is something that's maybe not explicitly stated, but is the passage of time and what that means for, like, you've got your parents who were witnesses to this, but the next generation is always going to be asking the stories. And sometimes, like in archives, the histories might be dormant for a while, but then after a passage of time, sometimes we're ready to face those histories. So, commemoration isn't something that I think that I do in archives, but like everybody's always having an anniversary, and sometimes it means like after a certain passage of time, that's when you're ready to talk about some of this history. And of course, we all know that like the histories repeat themselves. And you and I were looking at stuff from the 80s yesterday that were like, gosh, this looks a lot like what the language is right now. So I guess like that was just what I was thinking, is sometimes the passage of time and each generation developing a different relationship to that history is what makes archives not static.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, just add more sound to your personal archive. I will speak my melodic voice. No, I'm just kidding. But I think just something that kind of always strikes me is just the thought of general, like how bodies are archives, like you were saying, like skin, but also generational trauma is felt by later generations. And how in that way, memory, even though we're not aware of it and we haven't experienced that memory, like I'm feeling trauma from my ancestors that were taken away from their homeland in Senegal. And like, while I don't really love the anxiety that I consistently experience on a daily basis, it is interesting that some of it could have come from my ancestors, and just how kind of similarly to your family, it's like just because your parents like experience this in the moment doesn't mean that you're not experiencing it in different ways, and how bodies are living archives, not just because of our memories, but because of felt experiences and like, you know, sound and like you said, like sound affects us in more than just our ears, you know, like you can feel a sound, you can, you know, if you're synesthetic, you might be able to taste a sound, you know, something like that. So it's just really interesting how you could possibly experience this, not just in the memory of your parents, but I don't know, physically yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to pick up anymore. I feel like, oh, no, sorry, I thought this we were. I don't know. First of all, yeah, your voice is melodic. No, I think the question of kind of generational trauma is something that actually my wife Desiree has told me a lot about. I think I've been initially kind of distanced from thinking about that, because initially I'm like, oh, I don't want to insert myself into the struggles that my ancestors or my parents or anyone else faced. But then the reality is that these experiences have lasting and kind of knock-on effects. And that spirit isn't an abstract thing in this instance, it's a tactile material thing. Our bodies carry it, our interactions, the way they tell us stories and how we respond to that. Yeah. My dad, well, my grandma in her later years had dementia, and she lived with us, and I was sitting with her one day. She would sing these old hymns at like midnight. She would, go high with the pitch. She was a organist in the church and choir leader. My grandfather was also a choir leader. And I was sitting with her one night, and she just looked at me and she said, "Well, Bill, I didn't like your father." And I said, "Oh, why?" She said, "Because he was too politically involved. I didn't want someone like that with my daughter and possibly my grandchild." And then she said, "Well, now he's my favorite of my children." I don't know why I do this. I just like this story. But also just thinking in relation to generational, how stories, how spirit, how the passage of time operate as tactile things that we feel and that exist beyond just the kind of metaphysical, but actually land in concrete places for many of us. Yeah, I feel like it'll be one too.
I just wanted to say, like, I feel like every cultural tradition has a fried dough. And I was like, we should organize around this. We should do something
yes.
where we all bring our fried dough. I'll bring some maple skiva.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We need to make this happen.
I remember, since I'm old. But
Your
I-
experience.
yeah, well, it's very sweet. As I come on my birthday in August. But I remember being very, very sad. But it wasn't the first time I had seen children abused, because the 60s and into the 70s, things were getting bad. And it took me a long time to tell my parents, because I used to go to the South, because I grew up in New York, and I went to North Carolina to my grandparents' house, who I love dearly. However, they didn't give me all the ins and outs as a New York City child when I went into a store, because they didn't think they had to, I guess. And I went to the wrong bathroom. I was looking for women, not what color. I was just looking, I didn't know I had to make a distinction at the time. And I remember thinking, and my cousin, who, because I'm very fair, and in that time I had like sandy hair almost from the sun because I was outside, but I might have gotten away with it, but apparently I wasn't supposed to. My cousin, who was brown, comes running in and saying, "You're in the wrong bathroom." And I said, "No, it says women." And these two women are in the bathroom. We were getting ready to watch. They're standing there like we had guns. And I said, "Why are they standing like that?" She said, "You're in the wrong bathroom." Well, yeah, I just come out, you know. And I was like, "Really? There's another bathroom for you and me?" And she goes, "Yes, downstairs." And I was like, I said, "I'm sorry. I'm from New York. You only have to look for women. I'm just really good. I'm 8, you know, something like that." I didn't even know what to say. Now I knew about segregation. I thought I understood it. Then I got home, and that week, friends of my grandparents who had farms around them they put together a thing, and they would sit outside all night to make sure that someone did not come to burn their farm down because an 8-year-old child went into the wrong bathroom. Okay. And that was okay. So when I saw this as an adult, because I was finishing graduate school, I was very torn, very hurt, and my mother said, "You are not going to Soweto because I know you're going to die there." So I was like, "No, but I will give money. I will tell people, I will teach it," because it really hit me, because I had no idea New York has its racism, but there weren't separate bathrooms for Black people and white people. That wasn't it. It may have been in the 20s, but it wasn't when I was going. And so this really meant a lot to so many of us. But watching these people sit outside my grandparents' house for almost 2 weeks, they were fortunate. They didn't find me because I couldn't go to town again for about a month. But, it was like, and it really had an impact. And I didn't even realize how bad it was until I saw what was happening in Soweto, because we didn't get a lot of information. People really did. But it was very, very strong in many people when we saw this, because this was in the 70s. And I was like, and then all that memory came back. Because I hadn't told my parents anything about it. And my grandparents didn't tell them because they wanted me to be able to come back, and so did I. So I'm saying, and every time I see stuff all over the world, it is really, and I had just come back from Taiwan. I was finishing my master's in Chinese, so I couldn't go to the mainland at that time. But I had just come back. So I was feeling very, very whatever. So Soweto really is something that I really took very seriously. I know I donated, I pushed for people knowing what it was, but it really, and I realized that brought back a memory from 8 years old, of what could happen, so, it's, we have it here, and it's still here in some other place. Now it's against more than just people of color. Now we're going after, women, and we're going after people, trans. I mean, it's just it makes me sick. So, but I mean, it's real, and we have to deal with it, and it's a hard thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's good to see that, and I loved You Massacre Like Mary. Anyway, so all of us listen to her songs, like that. But
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Also, just a side note, but this weekend in Springfield, the South African Jazz Trio is performing, and if you're looking for something to do on Sunday, so worth looking for that. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it just again makes me think of Libby's thinking about passage of time and how time works in an instance like that. There's this thing that happens in your young adulthood, but it takes you back to this moment when you were 8 years old. Thank you. I know it's not easy to share.
Yeah, so it was really interesting to listen to some of the songs with you and everybody else. And I'm kind of wondering, is there a tradition where you're not just listening, but you're singing about some of these experiences? And what are some of those songs?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and off the top of my head, I won't be able to name any because I'm all over the place. But in my last talk, I named some of them. But yes, this tradition of collective songmaking, like sometimes the invention of song, the call and response tradition is one that exists powerfully. So someone will announce a line and it will be repeated back, or there will be a response of some kind. In isiXhosa, there's also overtone singing, where usually women, elder women would produce multiple voices, so singing in different registers all at the same time. So there's that kind of collective voice and sound making, but then there's also the kind of communal aspect where we all sit together, either call and response, or it's a tune that already exists, and we sing it together. I will say what is now the opening part of South Africa's hymn national anthem, which was initially written as a hymn, but also within the cadence of a traditional isiXhosa song by Nosondora. That is he writes this hymn to call to God to say, listen here, this is going on, can you come and help us, basically. Actually, there's another song called Senzeni Na, which translates to What Have We Done? And it's again, that one is a call and response. It's the kind of lead singing Senzeni Na, and then the rest of us responding Senzeni Na, asking the question, what have we done to deserve what is happening here? It doesn't name a single person in that instance, but instead asks the collective question for all of us. But yeah, there are these traditions. Yuma Sikela's song Stimela starts with him naming all of the immigrant people who came to South Africa, who made South Africa possible. So he speaks about the Zimbabwean mine workers who came to the country, the Angolans, the Mozambicans. Again, he doesn't name one single person, but it's there. A Luta Continua by Miriam Makeba is a song where she names people directly. Talks about Amilcar Cabral, Kwame Ture, various people, Chris Hani in South Africa, Biko. But in that instance, it's one person making the song. It's not. We sing it collectively together, but it's not that kind of communal making in that instance. But yeah, I love the tradition. I made a joke earlier that if I start singing, all of you are gonna run out of this room. But when there's 20 voices, 20, 30 voices going at it, and you can just, it's beyond transcendence, it's beyond meditation. It's a kind of, I don't know. Again, it takes the metaphysical beyond itself and becomes a tactile thing when you are grounded in that kind of sonic experience.
Yeah, I think an example, just last week, I was at the Caribbean Studies Association conference, which happened to be in Jamaica, and we were talking about, there were multiple sessions where this happened, but I'll tell you one session was what they call a plenary, where everyone showed like hundreds of people in this big room, and the topic was, it was a difficult topic, it was about land, and how most of the beaches in Jamaica, Jamaicans can't go to because the hotels own them. So there's a whole effort a political effort to make the beaches public for Jamaicans. And as they were talking, she was referring to Bob Marley's Redemption song. Like, I know that, I don't know the lyrics, but the speaker, like you, the person in your position, started saying these lyrics that were very relevant to the point. And she was sort of singing them. The whole room started singing along. Like, really, they knew the words, so it was just so powerful. And I say the whole room, there were people like me who, like, we could sort of hum along, but we don't know the words, but, like, it was just so powerful. It was so much along what you're saying. Like, I can't imagine a staff meeting that we all started singing. That's what it was like. Like, that. It was beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for that. My cousin and I, Winston, that song, on a random night, we would just play it out and do that.
Don't feel bad. I asked them to play that for a cruise. They told me they didn't know.
No.
And what was the other one that I got? Because and kids used to tease me, well, you're old. And I said, yeah, I saw Bob Marley twice in person. So they were like, you really didn't go there. I said, yeah, because I'm old. I saw him in person. I said, you want to tell me where? I said, so, but I know those songs, and I asked them, there's some songs they won't play on cruises. They don't say that. I said, you don't want to play it. You know it. I know you know it.
Because they're too political.
Yes. Oh yeah.
They'll rile that spirit instantly.
I can't be the person who wanted to make a living, but there are some songs in some places they do not play because they want you to be happy.
Yeah.
Redemption songs, So.
Old pilots to stay at all back. Sold back to the merchant ship. Yeah. All right. Yes, please.
So right now, there's a lot going on with the United States 250 celebrations, commemorations. And then, you go to the store and you can see the commercial engine, working to celebrate this imperialist state, right? And I think a lot about the need for counter narratives. What I wanted to know is there a tradition of underground press related to the apartheid times, or was that so dangerous that didn't actually happen?
Yes, there is a tradition of underground press. The difficulty was getting access to large enough print setups to be able to pass it on. Also, the radio was literally segregated. So there were Bantustans in South Africa, the Zulus lived here, the Xhosas lived there, the Tsonga, the Tswana. Everybody was forced into their little corners, and the South African Broadcasting Corporation would only play that music in that area and that news in that area. And so getting the word across was difficult, but there is a tradition of kind of transgressive underground storytelling, and as you say, counter-narrative. Again, one way was through song, actually. People will sing about historic events. and because I think of sound as a transgressive, not in a negative way, but sound as a transgressive wave, it doesn't ask for permission to cross into your space. And then later on in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a magazine called Drum Magazine, which wasn't underground, but it was a magazine for and by Black people. And that it was a commercial success, but it also carried deeply political counter-narrative stories as well at the same time. So if you go online, you can probably find a bunch of really cool posters and articles and stuff from that. Yeah. Before I finish, I want to remind you there's consistency. If you're okay with gluten and sugar and
Spices.
coconut and spices.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to say thank you again for being here. Thank you to these two gents for setting up the sound and the streaming, and massive thanks to Kim and other folks for making this happen so quickly. I'll be bombarding you more with sound stuff and South African related things in the coming years. So,
Sounds good.
so yeah, thank you again. Thank you.
Thank